Greetings, everyone. We are assisting researchers who are doing research on the documentation project, mainly for domestic workers in South Africa from the SADC region, particularly from Zimbabwe. Questions have been raised on what are the conditions of the domestic workers, and particularly those who are holders of the Zimbabwe exemption permits, who will not be able to move to another visa. In the next video, we are going to discuss what the minister was saying the other day on national television. But historically, the apartheid state was recruiting migrant labor mainly to work on farms and in mines. Most of us know what is called Wenela. Um, People from the SADC region were recruited, they were given special permits to work in the mines. If you are from Bulawayo, you are from Babane, Zambia, and so forth, Lesotho, you know one or two people that worked at Wenela. But this did not necessarily cover domestic workers. Domestic workers were not necessarily recruited by the apartheid state and be granted a special pass or a special permit to work in South Africa. Those of you that come from Limpopo and also Bedford will know that under apartheid there was an agreement that if you are on the other side of Bedford, on the Zimbabwean side, you will be given a special pass to come and work in the farms. These are seasonal workers. But of course, workers were abused. After working, they were sent back without being paid. It was the apartheid state was exploiting migrant labor. But for domestic workers that were coming to work in South Africa, mainly in the 70s and in the 80s, they would assimilate into South African society. At the time, the focus was the struggle for national liberation, a struggle against apartheid. Apartheid was in full force. People were segregated. Blacks would live in one area, or townships for blacks were created, and they were not allowed in white-only areas. And even if you were South African, if you needed to go to work in a whites-only area, you needed a special pass. Now, because the migrants were not necessarily South African, and there was no legal document that they could use to work in South Africa as domestic workers, mainly from Matabeleland. They to assimilate into the South African society, apply for South African identity, or apply for a South African identity document. It was easier because they would speak isiNdebele, which is more Zulu. Almost a number of languages spoken in Matabeleland are spoken in South Africa: Sotho, Xhosa, Venda, and so forth. So it was the identity, the South African identity, that domestic workers from the region, from Zimbabwe, from Swaziland, from Lesotho, would use the South African document. And at the workplace, they were considered as South Africans. Yes, they were not registered as workers get registered because the Boers or the whites knew that these were migrant workers, but were using South African IDs. This is why now and then, now and then, there were police raids because we needed to prove that indeed you were South African. So in the 70s, in the 80s, the people that were working as domestic workers did not have special permits. It was until in 1995, 1996, after the democratic breakthrough, that the President Nelson Mandela administration, recognizing the contribution in the struggle against apartheid by the SADC region, what was known as the frontline states, then gave an amnesty to such individuals that were using South African documents. A number of them returned those documents, and today, some of course have retired, some are still here. They use an ID which is normally referred to as the Mandela ID. So people that came in the 70s, came in the 80s, most of them use, which is not a citizenship, but is a permanent residence. This is why up to this day they use a Zimbabwean passport. So they were granted a permanent residence in order for them to avoid the raids by the police. Because when you had a South African ID in those days, if you meet a Zulu police officer, and the Zulu police officer will pick that your isiZulu is not the real isiZulu. You are simply speaking isiNdebele, even if though you use Zulu words, but it's easier to distinguish between Ndebele speaking and the Zulu speaking. The accent, my accent, when I speak in isiNdebele, I speak isiNdebele, it's very clear that I am not a Zulu. And of course, I've never claimed to be Zulu because I'm not one. But because the conditions at the time meant that you needed to survive, because the Immigration Act did not give provision for low-skilled workers to work in South Africa. So people would acquire these documents, ID documents, to work as domestic workers, to work also as security officers. You will know that during apartheid, a person who was seen wearing a security uniform was seen as part of an extension of the apartheid state, advancing the interest of the apartheid state. This is why when at the time you were a security officer, you will not wear your security uniform in the most cases, in Soweto, in Khayelitsha, and in other areas. You will simply put your uniform in the bag, you wear it at work. When you go to knock off, you remove it and put it in a bag for your own safety. So a number of migrants also worked in the security industry, as it is known, using the South African IDs. But of course, when the amnesty of 1996 was declared, I can't remember when it was passed, but the law says a foreigner does not work in the security industry. Those that are in the security industry will know that you will not register with the security board called SIRA, I think, if you do not have an ID. But mainly, omama asebenza emakhishini, obaba asebenza emakhishini, had to use South African IDs, and they were then given amnesty in 1996. So as we conclude, if those that want to continue doing research to understand the conditions under in which domestic workers lived or and worked during that time, wanted to acquire a South African ID, and it was easy to acquire a South African ID at the time. Because a South African family will literally adopt you because of the historical ties. If you are a Kumalo from Zimbabwe, you get introduced to a Kumalo family in South Africa. They will adopt you as their own. But the problem would be is that the misrepresentation is that you will say you are born in South Africa because the ID will say country of birth or country of origin South Africa, which was not the case. But you'll be adopted by the family in South Africa. They will assist you to apply for an ID. It was, as we understand, it was not a difficult process because during those days, under apartheid, the enemy was seen as white in the most cases. So blacks would unite, whether you were black from Eswatini, you are were black from Zimbabwe or from Lesotho, you were seen as a brother, because at the time you then had liberation freedom fighters, so to speak, freedom fighters that were living in those countries in Zimbabwe, in Lesotho, in Swatini, and many other countries, Zambia, and so forth. So they were assisted domestic workers who would then work as domestic workers to acquire South African ID document. And then this, as I'm saying, changed in 1995, 1996, after the democratic breakthrough of 1994. So there were no special permits. Special permits came later, 2010, which in the next videos we are going to talk to. But of course, there are others that did not surrender. Those IDs, they are known as South Africans. We have seen when people die, families will fight over the body of their family member because the family, particularly the parents of the person that would have came to South Africa in the 70s, 80s, they want them to be buried in their ancestral land in Zimbabwe, Matebele land, while the children, because the children are born in South Africa, would then want their parent to be buried in South Africa for the purposes of benefits, insurances, and so forth. So we always see families fighting over the burial of a departed loved one, because in terms of documentation, they are known as a South African, even though they would be having their Zimbabwean documentation. But then the problem would be if the person then gets buried in Zimbabwe, but in terms of the insurance and all the benefits, is registered as a South African, then the kids lose out those benefits. So hence, then the kids would want their parent to be buried in South Africa. So you might also assist, as we assist our academics who are working on a paper to understand the conditions in which domestic workers were working and living during the apartheid before 1994. They want to know what document they were using, how were they harassed by the police. As I've said, that you will be stopped by the police in the streets. They will ask you for an ID. You will produce an ID. They will start asking you questions, which we saw recently in Diepsloot, where they will want you to name your body part in isiZulu, and they will strike. Then they will tell you that no, you bought the ID. Either they will lock you up or they will collect a bribe from you. So please share with us your experiences, your stories that you were told by those that came to South Africa before us, or you are one of those. Please share with us in the comment section. I see comrades are writing. Comrade Kenneth Ndlovu says, Mabhena ngiyakhumbula umngane wami wayelayo i-ID yasemzansi, uthe ethi uyayisarenda amaphoyisa athi subalekela izikwelede zakho bamxotsha epolice. Is true. We'll talk about this, because there are many, even in 2010, when they wanted to hand over the IDs. They were told not to. They will make a copy and return with the ID book. We'll talk about that. So thanks so much, comrades, for joining. Please share your own experiences in the comment section, like this video, circulate, and please do subscribe to this YouTube channel. Otherwise, goodbye. I know Arsenal, Manchester United, and everyone else, they are celebrating that my team Liverpool lost. We are going to win in Madrid. Otherwise, goodbye.